present, future, all in the room, they're calling my name.
Hello, everyone. Today we have for you a special treat. We have David on the show. I think for me, as a listener, what I really enjoy about David's work is his humility and ability to learn from everyone. And he's had a lot of amazing people on his show. He's done a lot of really cool formats of having podcasts, including live podcasts, and over hundreds of episodes. There's a lot of really just interesting and powerful insights that he's shared. His podcast for Chief of Staff is a go-to resource to learn about kind of the current industry, as well as overall resources for Chief of Staff. And he has a lot of insights and podcasts around community building. Really a pleasure to have him on the show today. So welcome, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me. No pressure. I hope that I can deliver that flattering intro. And it is fun to reflect back. I know that you're, newer into the podcast scene, but making a big impact. And we were talking about just like the incredible network you've been building and how it's been helping, people connect with you and et cetera. And I actually was just, as you were saying that, I was reflecting on like, man, it really has been like an incredible journey. I think we're so often always thinking about what's ahead. Or what do we got to get done, but it's like, yeah, there has been a lot of amazing things. And also a lot of people have taken a chance on me as another thing that comes up when we think about like 400 plus podcast episodes and multiple shows. And yeah, those are people that like responded to a text message or a cold email, a LinkedIn DM that, I said, hey, do you want to chat? Or do you want to come over to my apartment? And people said yes. So I think also when I reflect on it, I think about how kind people are. And I think for anyone who's listening here, like if you take something away already, is that like people want to support, they want to collaborate. I think that's the other thing that's really cool about podcasting. It's like, can we do this together? It's not, can I pick your brain? It's like, let's have a conversation. Let's make something. Let's engage in something that's generative for each of us and that we can share for other people. And I think like that's the other thing that I've like taken away from this is like meeting people where they're at and creating something together is like such a beautiful way of reaching out to people. So yeah, thanks for having me.
And that's powerful. And I think in another theme, which I think about as well, is watching people as they grow as well. It's kind of like there's the personal growth in the podcast, but also seeing people you've had conversations with. And I've been doing this just a short while, but seeing where guests who've been on the podcast, where they're at now, for me is like amazing. Just a short time, kind of when they have that mindset of collaboration, like how far it does take them.
Totally. I mean, I know it's like, I wish I probably should have like invested in the people that were early members on the show, because of who they've become. But I think that that's another thing is like, I think I've like spot something in someone. And, I obviously wanted to talk about what's happening here, but there's usually I'm like pulled to people. And that's what I think like, I want to get to know them. I'm like, okay, this is really interesting, but there's also something about them. And, and like, I think, good people, special people, magnetic people, like they only continue to get better and they only continue to like, compound their skills, their relationships and so and podcasting just like makes that for, at least for me, because I remember the time, okay, like 2019, 2020, and then it's like 5 years later, like, wow, okay. Like, like that's a lot of things have happened and, it'll be, but also it'll be exciting for people to see that for you, like they'll be like, okay, I remember when I talked to him and, he had this background of books and now he's in a real studio and, he's in a, and there's like sponsors all over the place or, he's getting flown out to California in this, yacht or this villa to record something with some, Fortune 500 executive.
And I would say like for me, like honestly, like one of the first podcasts, and you have like different formats. So one of them that was like in a studio, I think it was with the founder of Good Work. And I'm like, this is like amazing fidelity. And then like seeing the contrast of like over the years, it's like, okay, like I can see how you get there. Like there's a path. Like I can get to that high fidelity version. I can get to that like where it's the same kind of ethos and conversational style, but like it just you tweak things. You kind of up the production value in certain ways, and kind of it's all kind of part of that compounding dynamic.
Totally. Yeah. It's I mean, I started the Portfolio Career podcast on my couch with my roommate at the time, and one little small handheld mic that I just put on like the table, and the audio quality was fair is like is generous, but it was good enough to get going. And I think for the first maybe like 30 or 40 episodes, I used that same one handheld mic, put it in the middle of the table, and then I think I've never my goal has been like to have the conversation and publish it, and it hasn't been about like the high production and stuff, and which I think adds certain kind of layers to things and complexities, but also it's not really like hasn't been the goal is like what's the best aesthetic or how do we make this look really cool and pretty, although that does have an impact, that does like help, does help certain things. Obviously you just talked about it, but I think it's been iterative, like just like how to be iterative for you and whoever else is listening to this too, about whatever they're working on right now, and how like things, small little tweaks. I think I'm not the most, I'm very consistent. But then when I like find things that I can like incorporate, then I'm like, okay, let's do this. And like, I'll just like keep doing it. And I eat the same food and drink a lot of the same things. It's like, I like to keep doing the stuff that's working, but slowly improve things and tweak things, but not too much, or else it feels kind of out of whack for me. What about for you?
I mean, I think for me, I think we have a similar ethos of there's a North Star we have, and that's about putting quality conversations out there. And we're not unaware of aesthetics. We're aware of aesthetics. We don't want things to become weighted towards aesthetics. So we figure out ways. Like I started off, I was using like my headphone microphone. I'm like, okay, I can invest a little bit and get a little bit of lighting, get a little bit of microphone. Like you figure out ways to invest or change. I used to record on Zoom. We're no longer on Zoom. But it's finding little ways to tweak things that don't kind of, if you're like kind of like weighting in different directions, it doesn't take away from that North Star focus, which is having those great conversations and really kind of about that cadence, about that consistency, and about that output, which I think also like if you get too caught up in the aesthetics, it feels more and more like a job.
Yeah.
And that takes away from the enjoyment. And I think in the best way, like even when I'm dealing with like the worst technical difficulties, like you're 10 minutes into an episode and you're like, oh shoot, my mic's off. Like I've had that. But even then, like it doesn't feel like a job. It's because when you keep that North Star, when you kind of focus on the topics and the guests and kind of the environment that you want to create, it makes it very, very seamless and very kind of, it just makes it feel natural, which
See, I haven't done a lot recently, starting in, after July 15th, 2022, which was like my first kind of in-person podcast recording post-pandemic, which actually happened to be an event. It was weird how I went like from not doing anything in person again to then like, an event. It really like ripped the Band-Aid off there. But after that, then I think starting in 2023, I really just decided to like lean more and more in-person episodes and in-person event episodes. And but then there's a couple times where it's like, oh, Zoom just makes it, or like virtual just makes it so much easier. But I haven't even upgraded to StreamYard. Like I still do Zoom. So you got me beat there.
I think for me, it's also been like kind of talking to different guests I've had on has also like inspired me in different areas. And I think it's definitely balanced. I think we're all human. We all get kind of caught up in the swirl of certain things, and the idea or notion of having things be a little bit more shiny, a little bit fancy can be a rabbit hole we can fall down. So for me, it's kind of like kind of continue to be this balance of like focusing on North Star quality without kind of getting too sucked into it. And I think it's a peril, and I think it's something that I could potentially fall into. But I try to kind of just keeping that North Star of like what my end goal is. It's not necessarily to look the most polished, but really to kind of to provide the highest quality in the conversation. Um, Taking a little bit kind of like a lens backwards, a little bit more kind of high level, you've had a very interesting kind of career path, kind of working kind of in certain, I would say, more kind of like uh, more tangible, kind of heavy, kind of physical transactional industries to the more kind of ambiguous and no less important, but kind of world of community. Um, and maybe there's that kind of connecting link of kind of growth in the middle. Love to kind of just hear about kind of your journey into that. And just, it's for me, just fascinating kind of what that journey has been like. And really kind of, for me, the fascinating piece is kind of tackling that ambiguity that you have kind of in recent years. We'll have to learn what that kind of journey has been like.
Tackling that ambiguity right now. So maybe, connecting the dots backward can help me currently. But yeah, so I really liked math. I really liked numbers growing up. And I was really interested in finance. And I thought, getting a job like on Wall Street would be like, kind of the dream job. And my first job out of school was in finance. I got a job in equity research, and I really liked the intellectual rigor and kind of the fast pace and like the intensity of it, um, and that really like helped me develop certain skills and professionalism. Um, and the But it felt like I was kind of missing a little bit of the human interaction. And I'd worked in like the service industry on the side in college and stuff, and I really liked that. And so like I was like, okay, this finance job's great, but like I'm missing some of this human interaction, this human collaboration, and also like really seeing like the tangibleness of my work. So the companies that I was creating equity research reports on were real estate companies. So then I was like, oh, like maybe I can get involved in like those companies. And these were like publicly traded real estate investment trusts. And so then I started getting into that industry and in like capital markets. So similar to like, kind of corporate transactions but on buildings, like how much is a building worth versus how much is a company worth that owns a bunch of buildings. So I like that. That was a nice next step, and found another job in there. And then one of my friends, he was working on a company um, that was real estate technology related, and they served their customers kind of served in a couple different areas as well. But the real estate space and industry then became like this big growth driver for them. And I don't think they initially knew it. And like most founders, you're kind of like getting the product going is like hard, but like finding who all your customers are and like what's the best market and growth markets and stuff like that. So then like I had that background, and so then we started chatting about it, and he's like, oh, like it seems like some of these people, like like maybe this is a better area for us. And that led to like basically like a chief of staff job with him, and then and it was head of growth, chief of staff. And then that was a really thrilling journey that took me to San Francisco, and then that took me here to New York, and then started meeting a lot of interesting people that kind of focus on different things than kind of like the startup scene that I really learned in San Francisco and saw in San Francisco. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I got involved with this one really impactful community called the Personal Development Nerds, and really started talking to people about like, what's your purpose? What books you're reading? What books are you creating? What events are you hosting? And I was like, wow, this is really refreshing. After the San Francisco kind of like more singular focus on like what your startup is. So anyways, long story short, then I started podcasts, because after I left that job, then I started doing like a bunch of different things, trying to figure out what's next. And then in that process, I learned like, oh, like these friends of mine at the time, like they're working on multiple things, like kind of like a startup of themselves. And then I started that podcast in 2018 and got hooked on that, and hooked on chatting with my friends, and saw like kind of what you're seeing of how the podcast can really like open up your world. And then yeah, like through different like projects, started working with different people that had been on the show, and it's like kind of a chief of staff capacity, and yeah, I think I've really just tried to work on things that were like interesting and had growth and were connected to people, and really like a good like use of my skills. So like more impact focused. But it's been a wild journey. It's been really fun. I've really learned a lot. A lot of people have taken chances on me, and but that kind of like finance to real estate tech, to chief of staff, to community, to podcasting, to chief of staff, and it's and it's and but I think the through lines have been just like since 2018. It's been like having great conversations and publishing things and kind of seeing where things go from there. It's been a very like emergent type of career path, and I feel like that's like what I'm on right now too.
I think for me, like I think about it, kind of the imagery that comes to mind is kind of like one of like sculpting, where you
Mm.
start off, where like in school, like what am I good at, and kind of you approach it from a tactical lens, and then over time, certain areas and themes start to like resonate. Like, oh, this seems like an area I want to go into, so you go kind of down that area of the mind. You kind of go deeper. I'm using a lot of
Yeah.
rare mineral excavation metaphors, but you kind of go deeper, and you come into another room in the cave, and you're like, oh, actually, I want to kind of go a little bit deeper here, and you start to kind of figure out like where all those things kind of come together. And I think like the really kind of amazing moment is when even the tactical piece kind of comes back into focus. Like you feel so aligned with kind of the more kind of purpose aspect and meaning aspect that you're able to kind of actually tie that back into kind of into the resonance, into the tactical. And to reference another topic you've written about recently, I think it kind of comes together with that kind of that combination of executive sparring
Yeah.
with the kind of with the doing, and kind of when you connect strategy to the tactical. And I think like that's really a fulfilling piece, because like I agree, I've learned like that the personal fulfillment piece is so crucial in kind of in defining your career, in defining kind of your purpose professionally. When you're able to combine it successfully with the implementation, with the execution piece, I feel like that's when it becomes even more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like the other thing is like industries and roles change, and and it's happening right now too. Career paths change. And I think, pre-pandemic, I was interested in community building and events and stuff, and I was doing it on the side or as like projects and stuff. And then kind of during the pandemic, it was possible to have that as a full-time job. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, something that I thought I I couldn't do full time could now do full time. And then now it's like, oh, hosting events and building community and doing it with founders. And that's another like emerging career path and stuff like that. And I think I've been pretty lucky that like these things that I were just kind of curious and wanted to do it to see my friends or to meet new people or to like just do something cool, like um in the last couple of years. Like there's a profession around it for me, and hopefully for other people as well, because I think it is very important and impactful work. And yeah, you get kind of lucky sometimes. And I think if you've got enough, there's downsides too. Let's not we can talk about those too. But yeah, I think like I've been able to get lucky and kind of ride some of these trends that yeah. So I think if you follow your curiosity and like do things for fun, and then it's cool when then all of a sudden it can become also a profession. And yeah, that's been a little bit of like what's it's been like for me the last couple of years, which has been nice.
So to dive a little bit deeper into that, I'd be curious to learn what you found helpful in minding ambiguity, and kind of the lens that I add to that is it's not only kind of minding ambiguity, but it's also sometimes you're working with kind of really large and consequential unknowns in the lens of like you've had the opportunity to interview and work with some pretty big names, and it's juxtaposing that with kind of maybe things that feel like maybe or seem like smaller wins, but are really kind of all part of that beautiful picture of like just kind of moving forward and building this wonderful tapestry that you've built. um there's a couple of questions in there,
Yeah.
but I think that the chief one is really like in handling ambiguity. And I think, I guess, to add more color to it is because when you do things like that, there is a big swing. Sometimes you're mining ambiguity and you find a kind of a 50 carat kind of gold nugget. I'm not even sure if that's the correct term, but you find you find a big gold vein, and sometimes you find a little bit of kind of a dusting of some nice crystals, and you're able to offload them to Swarovski. I mean, there's different kind of ways,
Yeah.
and sometimes wins seem small at the moment are big later. It's I think just the kind of the wonderful input of output of ambiguity are so complex. So we'd love to kind of just how you've approached that. I mean, I think this is kind of more both kind of like looking back in the past, but also kind of currently as you continue to mine that space.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like the big ambiguity was when I left my job in September, and great job. It really like did a lot for me. Um, and I wasn't exactly sure what was next. Um, and I kind of like did like a go to market for myself almost. And I, through that process realized like, um, I was like, oh, do I want a full-time job? I started interviewing people for some full-time jobs. Did I want to do more like fractional type stuff? Did I want to do more freelance stuff? And I found that um, the ambiguity of not knowing, like of having a blank canvas was actually a lot harder for me. It felt more like there's more like pressure. But then once I started saying yes to some projects, and I was like, okay, this is like a short-term project, like worst case scenario, like lasts a couple months and then it's over. But it like was starting to give me momentum, and I felt like I was feeling a little stuck at some points in the beginning of this like transition. And um and then I'd say like what had been helpful was like bringing people together and like having conversations and telling people like here's where I'm at, here's what like I'm thinking about doing, who should I talk to, or what comes to mind for you. Are there ways that we can partner and collaborate? And I think lots of good stuff has happened when I've hosted events and said like it's not necessarily to solve my problems, but um they've been to around certain topics and themes. But then, at the end of the event, when people are like, oh, why did you bring us together? Or like, what about you? And then it's like, well, actually, like, here's what's happening. And so like when you create value for people, they're curious about you. And so I would share and some opportunities like and some like potential opportunities open up that way. So I think there was like this like in September, October last year, I was like, what am I going to do? And then I started saying yes to things and got introduced to some cool people and worked on some great projects. And then I was like, okay, wow, like I feel like I can like do something here. And then that was kind of like last fall. And then I was like, wow, okay, I really like this like portfolio career again. And then a news cycle happened in the beginning part of this year of 2026. And then I feel like there's been these like 3-month cycles of like finding work and then executing that work and then having to find it again. And I'm kind of in that little like finding period a little bit more. But like each time, I think as an independent or when you're creating your own body of work, like you're not starting from scratch, but it is this like process of like continuing to figure out what do you want to work on next and finding it. And hopefully there's opportunities that like are win-win for you and for the other people. And yeah, I think, but also the thing that's been helpful for me is like always posting a podcast episode and a newsletter. So this like, there's all this ambiguity and unknown, but like, I can also look back and say like, okay, like the show's kept going. And I've realized like good things always happen over a long time period by putting out podcast episodes like this and publishing newsletters like you do. And so like I know that like I can't exactly time what's going to happen or figure out what's going to happen in the day to day, but like on a long enough time period, as I look back, like really amazing things have happened over time. In the moment, it might feel difficult and uncertain and like that things are falling apart, but I realize like on a long enough time period, like a lot of the stuff is going to get figured out because that's what, as I look back, that's what's happened too. So that's so I think there's like, yeah, one of the things I'm focused on a lot now is like, what can I control or what can I control? Yeah. What can I control versus like what I can't control. So like I can, in theory, control new podcast episode every week and a newsletter every week. So like I can control the number of cold emails I send out. I can control the number of like DMs I send, etc. I can't control how someone responds to that, how long it takes, etc. So that's kind of like the things that I'm like thinking about more and more is like, what are the things that I can do that are like generative, that are like positive, that are like generally moving me forward, and to get through ambiguity.
I thought that hit me as you were talking about this is because like there's an importance to have systems in place when you're dealing with ambiguity, and definitely relate to the power of taking small steps or small experiments to start kind of to see kind of how that looks and how that outputs. But I feel like that balance, that both appetite for risk and the need for a solid kind of balanced strategy, is something that you can kind of draw from like the financial space. And when it comes to investing and thinking about companies or thinking about outcomes, on the one hand, you need to have an appetite for outsized impact and kind of take big swings. But if you're only taking big swings, you can kind of deplete the coffers pretty fast. So there's a kind of that balance of like, do you have that kind of consistent, that index fund that kind of allows you to take your riskier bets? And I feel like definitely when you take like a bigger swing, like kind of stepping out on your own, it can like feel disorienting for a moment. But like I feel for myself at least, there's that ambiguity, there's that kind of that opportunity that calls to me, and it's figuring out like how do I continue to chase that, but in a sustainable way. So I have some sort of kind of repetitive kind of beat that kind of stays there and kind of gives me something to look back on, but also kind of propels me to take risks here and there and kind of and seeing them rewarded is definitely kind of what keeps it going and kind of keeps it moving.
Yeah. Yeah, I think figuring out what to work on is really hard. And you know, if you got a job and you got a boss, the boss will tell you what to work on. But when you're on your own, it's a lot harder. But it's also like where it can become a lot more meaningful. You're like, wow, I literally made this. Like this was with my hands or, you know, my fingers on a keyboard. But yeah, I think a lot of the stuff I've been thinking about is like, how do I like get by and like cover expenses, and then it's like, then what, you know? And there's been some good freelance articles and stuff about this, like get like a fractional job or like one client that like really covers your bills, and then, you know, then try to build on top of that. And then the other thing that comes to mind with what you were saying was this idea around small bets. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Daniel Fasalo's work. He's on the West Coast like you are, and he runs a community called Small Bets. And he really like, I think, has advocated for the idea of like lots of different small bets that you never know which one will take off. And you know, like I think people talk about this with like content, whether that's like LinkedIn posts or Instagram posts or tweets. It's like, you know, you never know which one literally like the algorithm is like helping out that day. And I think that's similar with like products and services and relationships. Like you never know which one is going to really like be the one. But if you make some, you know, some small bets and stuff, like, you know, push it a little bit forward or create something and ship something and like put it out there for like the market to see it. And then you kind of never know what'll happen. But yeah, it's similar to that kind of like, I'm thinking about this kind of chart that you were talking about too, which is nice with the index fund. Yeah, it's fun to think about this type of stuff. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Likewise. For me, yeah, it's something that like I've thought about and come to it from different angles. I mean, I think about for myself when I was like in college and thinking about things like networking and building connections and how that's changed and evolved over times. Right when I came out of school, I was going to like 3 events a week. I was like really immersed in things. And then I took a step back for a couple of years, and now I've kind of come back to this space and seeing how my own kind of philosophy has evolved around it, and seeing just, I think it connects also like in terms of like events and community, like having presence. And some events are kind of have outcomes that you don't necessarily see right away. And some of them are kind of our chain effects. Like I went to Meetup recently, which kind of encouraged me to go to a local conference, which kind of had like whole like chain effect. And it wasn't something that I was like, I just want to kind of check out an event that night. And that kind of led to a chain of events.
Are you still in that phase right now of like going to a lot of events and kind of putting yourself out there, or?
Yeah. So it's not like that. I mean, I'm no longer in my early 20s, so it's more like 1 or 2 events a week. Yeah, but I continue to kind of find events. I like kind of finding events, not just in the domains that I know. I recently went to a bioscience life event, which there's a lot of commonalities across industries, but like when they were talking about the hard scientists and kind of and showing kind of like the graphs that I haven't seen since high school, I was a little bit out of my element. I was like, I'll take your word that the chemicals work that way. But yeah, I think it's good to kind of keep things fresh and kind of put yourself in different, and like the more like I see an event and my first reaction is like, I don't know anything about that space, the more like, yeah, that's the event you need to go to. That's how you
Cool.
kind of expand your zone of comfort. Um, I think I'll close kind of on this question. I think it's kind of more the future kind of facing question. How do you see kind of the community space evolving in the future? And I mean, AI is a component, but I feel like AI is a more simple answer to index on, when it's really kind of about, there's a lot of other factors of kind of how society has evolved, and COVID definitely did a number on a lot of our social instincts. And I'd love to know kind of how you see that kind of developing, changing, evolving. Yeah.
Mm. Do you mean like from the profession perspective, or like what are the things that I'm doing focused on community, or what? Yeah.
Yeah, I think less on the profession and more what you're kind of seeing in the organic front of how participation has shifted, how the experience has shifted. Um, I think like probably like more business wise, like an analysis of the industry would probably be more useful to people. But selfishly, I'm going to steer it more towards kind of what you've seen kind of on the personal level.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's something that's on my mind right now. I mean, it's been on my mind for a while, but yeah, it feels like these days, like there'd been like some big shifts, so there was like um post pandemic, I feel like there was like a big wave of um people wanting to meet new people wanting to see people in person, and there'd been a huge rise and wave of um kind of more social oriented events and communities, um and I was hosting a lot of these kind of like events too, and mostly around like the podcast and stuff. Um, and then I think over in the last year or so, at least here in New York, it feels, as more companies had more in-person kind of mandates or focuses, it feels like people are less interested in the Tuesday night, let's hang out and meet new friends. Um, and so I've kind of shifted some of my events kind of related to that. And also, my work has become kind of events related. So I'm trying to draw that distinction between like, something that could kind of feel like work versus like what should just be for friends. So I'm trying to take like a barbell approach to my kind of events and stuff.
What's a barbell approach for the uninitiated?
Yeah. So like, it's either like I'm doing something that's very high touch and like focused on work. Ideally, it's with I'm being paid, or there's some kind of P&L associated with it. Lots of like pre-event connection and like just a lot of things like that. Versus like very low lift. So 2 weeks ago, I hosted an event, co-hosted an event at my apartment. It was called Bring a Thing, Hang, and everyone brought a thing, and that could be like people brought books and um, lots of different like really quirky things. But it was like, I don't want this to feel like an event. I don't want this to feel like work. I just kind of want to see my friends, but I know that like just a little bit of intention and a little bit of like, it's kind of like a show and tell, like gets people chatting and telling stories about themselves that allows them to connect with other people. So that's kind of the barbell approach. And also I did like in February and March, it was really, really cold. Um, I did some of these things that I was calling like minimum viable hangs, which was like, I don't know, from like the tech startup world, there's like the MVP, minimum viable product, but it was like, what's a minimum viable hang? And so I bought it was so cold. So I knew people weren't really going out, and my social life and social velocity had really come down. But I was like, we still want to see people. We still want to see our friends. We still want to like meet new people, etc. And I was like, I don't really want to like go to a coffee shop and bring like 10 layers and then take them off, and and then and that takes a long time and stuff. I was like that. But I was like, what if like I just kind of open up my apartment for friends, and if like 4 people come, great. If 10 people come, great. If you're there for 10 minutes, great. If you're there for 2 hours, amazing. But just like a minimum viable hang. And like, so that was another example of like this kind of barbell approach. There's like this conference that I co-hosted in March called the Community-Led Growth Conference. It was 70 plus community builders. It was a speakerless conference. Everybody is a speaker. There was no like speakers on a stage, but like lots of curation, lots of like really sweating the details and doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, and really wanted to make an incredible experience for people that were there, compared with this like minimum viable hang of just like, hey, like let's just get together. Like it's been cold. We haven't seen each other for a while. Let's riff, banter. Who knows? Maybe we need to talk about kind of like ideas or interests, etc. But just like a very casual thing. So that's kind of like how I've been thinking about things. And thankfully it's also a little bit nicer weather-wise here. So there's like just more activity that's happening just like outside, and just like I live in a neighborhood where a lot of my friends live, which is nice. So kind of leaning into that like spontaneity right now. Probably do some stuff like in the neighborhood. Last year I did some like really hyper local like neighborhood hangs, like only for the people in the neighborhood. And again, that doesn't really like feel like work. So it's things like that that I'm like trying to do more of. Yeah, that's like how I've been thinking about like friends and connection and community. But I think the other thing that's fun to do is like these kind of like monthly containers. So I think people they want to connect, and they want to like with existing friends or people that they know of, but like sometimes we don't really have like the mechanisms or vehicles to do it. So I've done these things sometimes that are called like, I've done like a dream bigger monthly experiment with a friend, and just like me and a friend, and we're like, okay, what's your goal for the month? And then like, let's check in about that. And then after the month's over, we kind of move on. And just like these little like containers for the month are like a good way to like get closer with someone, but it doesn't feel like it's like a heavy lift and obligation. I really like those kind of like, small containers, couple people, one person, couple weeks, and then you kind of move on because like other stuff pops up or other things are bigger priorities. So that's another thing that I've been trying to do is like, different containers with different friends.
So for me, I think I definitely there's stuff that I relate to, but it's a space that you truly enjoy. So, and you find ways to kind of to make it like the more professional, the more kind of like tactical and operational kind of level, and attached to revenue and kind of all those layers. But it's also kind of it's an experimentation and seeing kind of what those social experiences look like. And on the last piece you raised, to keep it topical and current, what are the corner of the Hawks? So I know this is definitely a sensitive subject right now in New York on the sports scene. He has a concept. He has a couple of ideas. One of them, he talks about like the idea of like misogi, which is like a Japanese concept of having like a year-long goal or a year-long container. But he also talks about kind of having 6 kind of like 2 per quarter, like mini adventures that you kind of anchor towards as well, and kind of having those systems in place. I think that kind of resonates with what we spoke about earlier of having that kind of that steady rhythm to anchor towards that goal, but also kind of giving kind of that open space of kind of having both the kind of structure, but also the blank canvas. And this has been an incredible conversation and a lot of topics that I enjoy talking about. So really appreciate having you on, David.
Likewise, Parrots. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
I'm glad.
Past, present, future, I'm done being patient. Every side of me meets in this basement. I was running in a circle, now I'm drawing a frontier. Past, present, future, I choose my career.